Hello and welcome to another edition of PM Express Manifesto Tracker. Tonight we are doing something slightly different. In the last few months we've been analyzing particular sectors when it comes to the parties' manifestos, mainly the two main political parties. But after having done that for a while, done the economy, we've done the housing, we've done health, and a whole host of other specific sectors, it's good to sort of sit back and do a broad analysis also and get broad input into what we've seen so far as how important the manifestos have become as we approach December 7. And obviously, the Center for Democratic Development, as you could see, have done a lot of work in this area. They've published a very important booklet on this that sort of gives you a certain guide to what you can expect in a manifesto. They've actually done also some detailed analysis. In fact, our analysis we did a few weeks back on the health sector was something that they had led, and that was a very fascinating conversation indeed. And so I'm here at the Center for Democratic Development to get the center's impressions so far on the work they've done in the manifesto sector, and also assess how important it's becoming. We had expectations coming into the elections when we're doing the manifesto documented analysis. I wonder whether they believe now, having seen how it's played out in the last few months, whether it's meeting expectations. Are the parties, are the documents being received? How is it being received by you, the electorate? And is it mattering in the decision-making process going forward? And I wonder whether the CDD is assessing all that, and we're going to tap into that and have that analysis as we approach December 7. And so this is the approach tonight on the Manifesto Tracker. My name is Evans Mensah, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined on set tonight by the head of the center himself, Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, who has been speaking quite eloquently about the manifestos. And so I'm delighted that he could join me. Prof, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Also joining us is Kojo Asante. The first time I'll use his title, Doctor. Henceforth, I'll just call him Kojo. And as for Prof, I just say Prof. I know he doesn't like that. He says, as you say, it's Kwesi Prempeh. I should just say Kwesi. And so I'll use Kwesi. We're going to have a very informal conversation, but analyzing what we've observed in the last few days with the manifesto. Could you thank you very much. Let me start with you, Kwesi.
Good.
Give me your impression so far. I mean, you did the booklet, and for our audiences who haven't seen, it's a manifesto project, it's called, and great insights into how a manifesto can be and should be responsive to the people's needs. It's been a few months since you did it, a few weeks since you did it.
Sure.
The game has been on for a while now. People have looked at this. Manifestos are out. Your impression so far?
Well, I think certainly when we went into the project, the thinking was that we had anticipated already that this was going to be a manifesto-heavy campaign. And I think the point of inflection in terms of our expectation was the 2016 election. I mean, it was a turning point of sorts, because it appeared to us that increasingly from that election was quite a manifesto-heavy campaign. And the subsequent years, which is once the NPP came into government, it became clear to us that the way they were rolling out their programs suggested to us that we were going to be seeing something like government by manifesto of sorts. So you saw the creation of these special purpose ministries, just designed to implement specific campaign promises. I'm sure the only special purpose ministry we didn't see was a ministry for free SHS. But we saw railway development, we saw special initiatives for 1 million one constituency.
In fact, even for the free SHS, they created a special purpose secretariat for it.
Yes, exactly, right? And a special purpose secretariat for 1D1F, so we saw all of this stuff being rolled out in this way. And it sent signals to us that going into 2020, we would see really manifestos coming to the fore as the real the real kind of document around which the campaigns will be fought. And I think as they've both rolled out their manifestos, we are beginning to affirm or confirm that expectation that indeed the parties realize that they can no longer play just to their bases, that you can go into an election with your base locked in, but to the extent that we've been seeing party turnover in government, it suggests that there are some voters out there whom you have to win over with more than just particular kinds of whether identity issues or your particular ethno-regional coalition. There are some voters out there who are looking for issues. However small they are, they may still tip the balance. So we see that the parties are beginning to play to that. And once the manifestos rolled out, we've had an opportunity to assess them, to look at them, first to see to what extent some of the issues were picked up. Because our project was not a prescriptive project. We did a diagnosis of a number of the sectors to identify key problem areas, key challenges, key structural concerns that we thought, based on the work that had been done for us by experts and our own surveys and secondary research, we thought that these were the key areas in the various sectors that we would expect the parties to deal with. So we fed this document to them while they were developing their manifestos. Luckily, we could get it in good time to give it to them, I think around May. We were able to give it to them around May. And we were hoping and expecting that some of it would be reflected. Well, some of the issues are definitely reflected. Of course, parties have their own interests and their own agenda, so not all of them, especially in governance. There is just a huge gap between the expectation of this document and what the parties have given us. But when you look at areas like the economy, certainly both parties, I'm limiting myself to the two main parties because those are the ones that have produced manifestos for us to look at. So when you look at, say, the economy, the key issues in the area of the economy, as our document flagged, are around jobless growth. The economy has seen steady growth over a consistent period, 10, 15, 20-year period. We've seen steady economic growth, but we have not seen growth accompanied by jobs. So jobs really just pop up as a big issue. And you can see that both parties also focus on jobs. The NPP's last manifesto had actually jobs in it. Yep. The NDC, which is now the challenger, also now has jobs in its manifesto. And when you look at the kinds of things that they are doing, you see that, both parties, so there are some interesting trends you see here, that when you are the challenger and you meet an incumbent that has rolled out policies that are popular, from my reading of the NDC manifesto, you see that the attempt here has been to try to embrace whatever it is that's already being done that is popular. And not only to embrace it, but to actually say, we are actually adding on to it.
We are doing it better.
Yeah, so you see that, with, say, jobs, even something like NAPCO.
Yeah.
NDC says, we like NAPCO, we'll make it permanent.
Yeah.
We like free SHS, we'll extend it to private. Yeah. They don't use 1D, 1F language, but when you read the portion on the industrialization and the industrial policy, they are talking in terms of, trying to rely on local comparative advantage and collaborate with private sector to create jobs in the districts based on their comparative advantage. The theory is about 1D, 1F. Yeah. So they all seem to have converged on the key issues, right? There's quite some convergence on the key issues. And at least that's my initial observation, that the NDC's manifesto gets in as a challenger, and you've said it multiple times, that they promise more.
Yeah.
And that's what the challenger does. The challenger comes as the underdog and sees that the incumbent is already quite ensconced in power and has all of the advantages. So their job is to actually basically outdo them.
Yeah.
And so they come in not just promising more in numbers, but also in substance, they try to outmatch them. And that's what you see. That's, at least for my initial reading, that's what I see.
Let me bring in Kojo. I mean, you have had time to digest the manifestos now, I believe. Have they met your expectations so far?
Well, thank you again. I think just going back to why we were interested in this manifesto project, we really thought of it as a value chain, that from what we were seeing from 2016, that the manifesto had become basically, as Prof has said, Kwesi has said, that it had become government by manifesto. Whatever was in the manifesto was what was going to be policy. And in some cases, sometimes even skip some of the governance processes like parliament and so on, right from manifesto to implementation. We felt that, okay, then we needed to have a process to input into the writing of the manifesto, and then to be able to assess whether or not it meets our development goals, our national goals. But even after the process, whoever forms the government, that we're able to track it. Now, having sort of read the manifestos, this is probably the first time I've really looked at the manifestos closely.
I must confess, this is true for me too.
It was very frustrating. It was very frustrating because when you begin to think about the implications for governance, for just the provision of services for millions of Ghanaians, the well-being of people, it's quite challenging that those that are proposing, putting forward, their ideas for us to vote for them in power, are not diligent enough in terms of the way in which they sort of lay out the ideas in terms of the feasibility of it, knowing the financial situations that we are in. So you begin to wonder, how much time do they really spend on this? How seriously do they take this? Because if you take the economy, for instance, everybody knows that once you deduct emoluments, you deduct payments, you deduct
interest.
Transfers, interest, and so on, you really don't have any money left. We know that our debt burden is just ballooning. It's much more difficult to go and raise money. So knowing all of those things, if you see a long list of promises, and even when people are interrogated and say, okay, where are you going to get the money from? It says, we'll do magic. We'll cross the bridge.
I had a very interesting example manifesto tracker recently where I asked the NDC's Dr. Maniboama on the extent free primary health care.
Yes.
How they're going to fund it.
Yes.
He was upset. I'm asking the question because he says, it's not about, don't ask me how, man, because the people need it. And when we get there, we would find the money.
But it's
about prioritizing.
But there's a problem with that because as a politician, yes, you can gamble. I mean, because you're seeking power, you want to assure the public that, yes, you'll figure it out when you get there. But the kind of choices you make can have serious implications for the financial health of this country. If you take, people have raised this point about free SHS, that yes, it's a good idea. The objective is right, but it's not sustainable in the way that it is currently presented. If you don't take some very drastic things like thinking about, okay, does everybody have to go to a boarding school? Because you have to look at the per capita cost for secondary school. If everybody who is going to secondary school have to go to boarding school, for instance, if you decide to put all your money in free SHS, what are you going to do with basic education? What are you going to do with preschool? Because those foundations, and you have a little child, I have a little daughter.
Me too.
It's so critical.
Absolutely.
At that level, 3 years, 2 years, whatever, to build their foundation. So if you put in all the money, and the point is, the thing is not magic. If you take money here, there's a trade-off. You don't invest there.
Opportunity cost question.
Right. So if we don't deal with that in a realistic way, then we are all kind of fantasizing. Governance become like, a gambling, game.
Yeah.
So, but why is it that we know that picture, and yet we are behaving as if it doesn't exist?
Because they have to win the election.
Yeah, but that is where
You
I
have to
think,
excite the people.
but that is why I think the one
vote for you.
aspect of this project, and we admitted that this is the first time we are really making this a subject matter, and so we don't expect that the public will get it fully. But if we do it over a couple of elections, we'll get to a point where the parties will be forced to amend even what they have put forward. But the citizens have an important role to play in it. Because if they don't insist on cost issues, on feasibility issues, on a long-term agenda, because there's some of the things we are talking about, there's no way anybody can do it in 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, right now we are telling them, through the partnership with yourself, with Imani and others, every week we get to analyze something and tell you what is possible, what is not, sometimes make up your own minds. But bro, do you think that people care? Do you think they care all this work that we are all putting in?
Well, from the
a lot of resources we're spending. You think they
the
care?
rounds that we made, once we produced the document, we didn't just sit here. We had public events. We went as far as to Bolgatanga, we were in Tamale, we went to Sunyani, we went to Kumasi, and of course we did a couple of events in Accra as well. And at each of those forums, clearly, and maybe except for the Accra ones where it was mostly media heavy, but outside of Accra, the engagements were with just regular people in the particular locations, and clearly people actually get it. So in Sudan, for example, we had the Peasant Farmers Association. People react to the agriculture component of the product that we put out, and the Cocoa Farmers Association also. Because in the agri sector, we have the crop section and then the cocoa section. And they both validated a number of the things that we had discovered. And we're quite happy that we were actually going in this direction in terms of, instead of giving the government a laundry list or the parties a laundry list of things we think you should do, these are the recurring problems that almost evade remedy election to election, from election regime to regime. So how are you going to address these things? I think that when you have engaged people with a document at that level, and now we have a local language tree translation of it, which we will also give the local language radio, right? So I think once you have engaged people at that level, they get it. They get the idea that fine manifestos are not just to be seen as a wish list of things. Like Kojo said, there are trade-offs to be made. We have a limited fiscal envelope we're dealing with. One of the motivations for doing this was that we also feared that while government by manifesto may be a positive in the sense that it focuses our attention on issues as opposed to frivolous stuff like personalities or divisive stuff like identity and ethnicity and the like, to the extent that it was moving us to discuss issues germane to our development, it's a positive. But there's a risk in government by manifesto. The risk is that then we could end up in a race to the bottom. The parties would try to outcompete each other. Who promises the most without regard to the issues that Kojo has put on the table.
So far, have you seen that this year?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so when you look in the manifestos, it's very clear that nobody wants you to ask them about cost.
Nobody.
Nobody is even factoring in the fact that this is a post-COVID, these are post-COVID manifestos.
True.
Or maybe not just post-COVID, these are COVID-informed manifestos. Right? But except for mentioning COVID, the manifestos do not seem to engage the new reality that COVID has imposed on us.
True.
In fact, we are going into the election with even our sovereign rating having been downgraded.
Yeah.
Right? That means that if we were even expecting to go and borrow to make up the difference, which has become our norm, the cost of borrowing is going to go up because we've been downgraded. Right? Our rating is worse than it was before. So, but you read the manifestos and people are still promising reductions in taxes,
Yeah.
right? They are promising tax cuts.
They're promising to spend, I mean, historically, amounts that are mind-boggling. MPP said they'll spend 100 billion in the next 3 years to get NDC's big push, $10 billion.
Over 4 years or over 5 years, right? And yet, at the same time, when you look at the revenue side of the equation,
Yeah.
they tell us, oh, so there's this new kind of neoliberal answer they give. Oh, once we grow the economy, we will get
tax
more
more.
The money will
taxes.
come.
Of course not. I mean, we've been growing the economy. It hasn't necessarily reduced, it hasn't necessarily improved our revenue to GDP ratio in the region. It's one of the worst, right? So GDP itself doesn't translate into taxes. If you don't have an efficient, effective system to actually tax your citizens, citizens can become rich, get rich and richer, and the state can get poorer and poorer and poorer. So when you look in the manifestos, they are oblivious to issues of cost. They are not engaging the cost. They think that citizens are only looking for what they can get and not what the pain they will. So it's almost like only the gain they can give you. There is no pain here. Painless manifestos. Completely painless. There's nothing in here that is squeezing you. So there's nothing to dislike about it. You know? And that's one of the fears, is that we are going to get into this populist game where even things that are contestable, for example, like whether or not it is feasible long term to build a free SHS on a boarding school model. This should be a contestable policy issue, because I believe that even in-house within the government, this is a contestable issue. But you are afraid to go and touch that because it has become so popular that the challenger just goes into it and says, we have embraced free SHS. We
have to extend it.
Private school.
Yeah.
When in fact, the fundamental debate is still there as to whether or not a country like Ghana, alone in the world on this issue, is going to be able to build free secondary school education on a boarding school model. We are alone in the world in this. It's a highly contestable policy issue, but nobody wants to.
Yeah, I mean,
the manifesto.
So could you? I come back to that question about the. So this is about the people,
Yes.
right? Primarily, it's about the people.
Yes.
The question I asked probably there, but so do the people care? Somebody's going to be voted for. The question we ask is, do the manifestos matter? In the big scheme of things, somebody has to win the elections. The people will vote. The people who are going to voting, you really think that they wake up and say, well, I've listened to Kojo, I've listened to Kwesi, I've listened to Imani, I've listened to Evans on TV and the likes, and because of what they've said about manifesto, I'll either vote for NDC. Haven't they made up their minds already? Sometimes I honestly, sincerely wake up, sit up and prepare and wonder, aren't I wasting my time doing this job? I mean, because I wonder, the people who are, do they really, really care about all this fantastic analysis? Because they haven't made up their minds already.
Well, I mean, you also do the ballot box and other things.
Yes,
I would like to pose the question back to you.
I don't mind.
It's a
conversation.
At some point,
I don't mind at all taking on that question.
But I think if you take in terms of the electoral calculus, that okay, yes, there will be people who identify with MPP or NDC, but there are always going to be a chunk of people who are non-committal, who are going to be swayed. Oh, of course.
Otherwise, why do
exactly? That's so, and that swing is a big swing.
Yeah.
You know,
last year can be very, very
exactly.
big.
So it tells you that there are definitely people who can move one way or the other.
Okay.
And the question you have to ask is that what is it that persuades them to vote? If it's not identity of some sort, party identity of some sort. And I think there are people who look at what the parties are promising. And the point that we have, the conundrum that we have is that, as Prof said, there's a convergence in terms of a lot of the promises that are being made. So it's just somebody wants to enhance it, somebody wants to expand it, and so on. But they're talking about the same kinds of things. So what is it? Is it going to be the credibility of the person that is promising it?
And their track record.
And their track record. Is it going to be the fact that you don't really think that this person really understand the issue well, or they haven't really captured or framed my issue well. There are going to be many, many factors. Some people even say, "Oh, I won't go and vote." Sure. You know, in Ghana, you always cannot say, you cannot tell whether, you know, people will turn out, because by the last minute, people change their mind all the time and still go and vote. So there is still a lot to play for in terms of the manifestos and the articulation, whether you believe that, you know, they're going to solve your problems. But for where we sit, the challenge is that even when people become aware that the costing issue is, you know, it's not like they are responding and saying, oh, okay, maybe we have some innovative ideas. They are adding to the conversation. Often they're just trying to avoid it till they can get past the election. Yeah. So we need to get there. We need to get there with the populace as well. And so for us, as I said, it is the beginning of a conversation that we have to continue to have, even after elections. Because the other thing that, you know, as Prof was saying, is that the parties even feel like they cannot modify their proposals when they are, in fact, because the opposition will say, this is what you said.
Yeah, you deceive the people.
Yes, but at the end, who suffers? It's the people who suffer. So if there's a reality,
truth in that. I mean, this is a job interview on December 7th.
Yes.
You come to the job interview, you make a promise to the panel, which is a majority of us, 30 million or 60 million now, 17 who will be voting. And you say, I'll do X, Y, Z for you. I say, okay, I like you.
Yeah.
Then I vote for you.
Yeah.
And then you get into, I employ you. Yeah. And then you say, oh, I'm sorry, but what I promised that I would do, I won't do. But isn't there some value in the argument that
so you can
you have to implement exactly what you promised?
No, you can make the argument. Everybody will say, yes, you lied to us. But having said that, are we going to allow you to stay in that lie and take us to a destination that we will all suffer? You know, there's a reality to governance that is the point is that we should be able to create an environment where the parties don't feel like they don't basically enslave all of us and lead us to a destination that would impact us negatively. We have to create that environment because circumstances change. So it is important that we track even the implementation of the proposal that they have made. And if we feel that if you are going to make sure that whatever it is, all our money, you put it into free SHS, and therefore everything else will suffer, I think we have to have a way of correcting that even in government. So I think for us, the Manifesto project is a cycle, because we'll come back again on the record, and then whatever new things are being promoted. So I don't see it as just the agenda setting phase or the evaluation phase, but also the implementation phase, and then we come back again to the cycle. That conversation must continue even beyond election.
Prof, you have any comment on this?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's when you look at what's happening on this issue of the costing and, you know, your freedom or autonomy to change your mind once you're in government, I think this is why it would be helpful going forward, maybe in future manifestos, with the push from, you know, programs like yours and how we are actually approaching this year's. We are hoping that part of the learning from this year will actually feed into how the parties do manifestos next time. So if you can tell us what projections underline the assumptions you are making about the economy. So you are going to do this. By how much do you think the economy will grow year on year under your tenure? How do you project revenues? What's the projection on this and that? So if you give us some basic economic data, well, the thing about manifestos is that you are actually making a projection into the future. So there's always an element of uncertainty, right? You are making promises based on a certain element of uncertainty about the future. But you can minimize that uncertainty by at least helping us with your best estimate of what you think, if you did all of this, by how much would the economy grow? If the GDP grows by this much, how much of it do you think you can capture in taxes? So we know some data. Provide us give us something that we can use to assess the feasibility of the things you are promising to do. But if you just don't mind the numbers on the revenue side, on the GDP side, on all of the things you would need to implement that, and you just tell us, I'll implement this. Even the capacity of the public services to implement some of the manifesto promises, right, is questionable. You have a public services that, in many cases, has huge capacity problems, whether in terms of human resource, whether in numbers or in quality, whether it's technology, whether it's capital equipment. A lot of the ministry MDAs don't have the basic things to work with. And they are the ones you are going to rely on to actually roll out these things across the country. Unless, of course, the parties have a different way of implementing this. And we've seen also that increasingly they are sidestepping established institutional frameworks for rolling out these things and creating their own parallel things. Some of the special purpose ministries you could say are parallel institutions that are party run to implement party agenda. That is also problematic because then you are sidestepping the civil service, you are sidestepping the established public institutions that are there on the ground all the way to the district level and can implement these things. And you are creating new ministries, right, just around your party structures. So all of these things are things we should ask them about. Who are the personnel that are going to implement this across the country? Where are you going to find them? What kind of capacity do they have? Are you going to use the same civil service that we know? And if so, how are you going to equip them to be able to do this work across the country? So these are questions, I think, like Kojo rightly said, this being the first time we're doing it this way, our hope and expectation is that the lessons from this will feed into the next stage, not the next stage of this manifesto, but also the next election cycle, so that together with media, we can tell the countries come 2024 that, look, we are not going to let you get away with the kind of manifestos you did the last time around. This time, we will be expecting you to tell us, give us projections about economic growth, give us projections about revenue, give us by how much do you think you can reduce the debt? How much do you project debt will grow under your program? Put it in a manifesto. Let's see, by how much do you think our debt will grow or will fall? And in these sectors, how much value for money are you going to get with all the things you are rolling out? How much value for money are you going to get in housing, the housing projects, on infrastructure, in the hospitals you're going to build? What's the value saving you think we're going to get? So that we can have a realistic, because there's a real fear that we can be led, to really borrow its metaphor, we can be enslaved and led to a destination, thinking that, like they said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yes.
Right? So the parties will come with all these good intentions, but you will see that it's actually the road to hell.
Yeah.
So we ought to be able to step back and say, it's not all about freebies. We cannot, in the economy we are, we cannot afford manifesto after manifesto just promising free
things
without telling us how we're going to pay for it, not just immediately, but also posterity.
Yeah.
Also posterity.
Yeah.
So
I want to take a quick break. I'm going to take a quick break. When I return, one of the observations I've made since the manifesto was well launched is that they've launched a document, very detailed document, but when you actually see them and hear them on the campaign trail, I've been listening to deviations from what they promised. I don't know what that says about the manifestos that they've taken time to print. We'll get comments on that when we return. This is the Manifesto Tracker. It's on PMXS. My name is Evan Smith, so stay with us. And thank you very much for staying with us here on PM Express Manifesto Tracker. Every Wednesday evening, we have the analysis of the party's manifesto, and then we interrogate the reps on these areas using the analysis. But tonight, we are taking a different approach. We've done this for the last 2 months or so, and we thought we should step back a bit and reassess what progress we are making collectively with CDD and other partners, Imani, etc., and see if we are making the progress that we thought we will make with the projects that we launched on the manifestos. Kojo, just before the break, I was making the point that having read the manifestos, and we were all excited when the manifestos came up, I couldn't wait to get my hand on a copy and read. And I thought, wow, these are very detailed. Like, at least if you look at the bulkiness of it, that somebody had really done a lot of work. But then we saw the campaigns launched. Now COVID seems to be relaxing, so they are now hitting the ground. First, we thought it was going to be virtual. I have started seeing deviations from the document. The document that you hold them to. My fear is, and this is coming from a real example I have for the MPP. They said 1D, 1F. They put it in print in the manifesto. But on the campaign platforms when they were campaigning, they said, we will implement 1D, 1F in every district on the campaign. They didn't tell us that in print, what they told us is that it's private sector. In other words, if private sector is not picking it up, you cannot blame us. In fact, when I asked the Monitoring Evaluation Minister one time about this, that you said one district, one factory, which means that by the December 7, I should see all the districts with a factory. He says, no, that's not what we said. We said private sector. So if private sector is not picking up, we can't blame. I said, really? He said, challenge me, go and read what we printed. I picked the document, opened it because I had forgotten. And indeed, it's there in print. But that's not what they said on the platforms. We are beginning to see that now. I'll give you two examples. So John Mahama has said that they will legalize Okada. That's the print. Now he goes on the campaign platform and adds a different layer. We will now do it on hire purchase. So the state is now going to buy the motorbikes for you. It's not in the manifesto. It's added onto it. There's a second one that I also heard recently that also was on the manifesto, but he's put up there. I'll bring that up very shortly. What does that say?
Well,
it
says that the manifesto itself is a political process itself. So even before the manifestos were launched, they were already making promises.
True.
The 88 district hospitals. I think President Mahama also had already started promising certain things. I think it was abolishing the licensure exams and other things and so on. So there's a political process going on, and then the parties, particularly on the Okada matter, basically seeing how the competitor reacts, and then they add or adjust to their proposals that they have put. And even sometimes they go to an area and then the chief says, "So okay, well, this is what we are requesting," and then they make the promise there and add it to whatever. So, but it comes to the same basic point that yes, as I said, it's a political process. You're trying to mobilize people's support and so on. And at that point, when you don't say something, your political, your campaign people will tell you that you can't leave without promising, that yes, when you come, you create a new region or create a new district or whatever it is that you are promising. So there are those layers of promises that will be added by the time we finish. The key point again for me is just that, what is the feasibility and can it really damage? Because you go and promise something and you can't deliver it. The people are expectant. By the time you come, they say, all these things that you promised you couldn't do. And the more we pile up, because we are piling up the promises, if we begin to start taking the promises from, probably if you have to go back to 2012, a lot of them still have not been done, and there are new ones that have been added. Some are maintaining theirs and then adding, different ones. The people eventually at some point become frustrated and they think that this is really just a game.
But isn't that what it is?
That is why we are doing what we are doing, and I have to commend the media for it, because for the first time, I know we have done manifesto stuff in the past, but this is the first time I've really seen like a real investment in trying to interrogate the manifestos that have been presented. So there is an effort among, different people to really push the public to begin to take this seriously and hold back a process that we might end up with, which devalues the governance process, because already there's a lot of fatigue with the electoral process. If we get to a point where the public is like, oh, they come again, they are coming to promise, they will not deliver anything, it completely devalues the whole governance system, and the implications for it is very, very serious. You cannot govern when you don't have the support and the legitimacy. So even though people, you win the power, you do whatever, whether it's vote by, whatever it is, you promise, you get into government and you can't deliver any one thing because you don't have the money, you don't have the resources, you can't even pay government workers. You are putting the state in jeopardy. And at the end, it's all of us that are going to suffer. So this is really an attempt to kind of, hold back where we are moving to, because people don't care about the after effect. They just want to get the power and go and try and deliver. Hopefully they can do something. But the people are expecting that when you came to the village or the town or whatever, and you promised them that you would build a new hospital, that you deliver. And every election after every election, they don't see it. They think that this process is really basically a fraudulent one.
Prof, what you put
that for me is a worry.
The thing about it that I find, it's more difficult to hold them to the things they say on the platform. You see this one, you can refer to it 10 years down the line, you can go back and say, this is what you said.
That's right.
But the one that they say, and that's what the people respond. We should.
Absolutely. We are very oral culture. I mean, literacy levels, quite a number of Ghanaians, large numbers of Ghanaians cannot read this thing.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So even in, which is why we are trying to do a local language version. So I think that we should consider as part of the manifesto the promises that they make on the campaign trail orally. Absolutely. Somebody should be documenting them and adding them as a supplement to this. Otherwise, it would be unfair to those people to whom those promises are being made. So we should hold them to those promises as well, because this is just a written form. The oral form is just as legitimate. So in my view, it's all of it together.
But does it betray a certain intention? Because I wonder, is it being done deliberately?
I think, of course, because, clearly, like we're saying, there's an attempt here, because the ideological difference between the parties has narrowed. If it ever existed, it has really narrowed to a point where really the labels they put on themselves and we put on them really do not reflect the manifesto preferences or the kinds of policy preferences that they're making. Right? Both look fairly neoliberal in terms of how they see economic growth and how economy trickles down and all of that. Both at the same time look like they are social democratic in terms of what kinds of social protection things they want to do. So they are competing with each other even on the ideology. So the difference there is almost disappeared. The danger then is that because there is very little commitment to a certain ideological view of how public resources must be used, they just basically match each other. So if you promised Okada, and it appears to catch on, immediately it's catching. And again, because we say that on the big macro issues, there is a certain movement towards convergence. So now the real issue becomes, how do you fight for the votes on the margins, right? And the votes on the margins, you notice, are promises to particular constituencies of voters, not big macro issues. We will give you teacher allowance. You know who will get it. We'll give you Okada. And then Okada comes and then one says, oh, but we will migrate you from Okada to a car. Say, oh, but you are the Okada person. If you wanted a car, you probably. So we'll give you a motorbike, high purchase. Rent advance, big issue. They both promise some rent advance scheme. True. See, and yet they made sure that their manifesto did not leak. So, but you can tell they are all thinking, there's almost like they are reading the other's mind. They're looking at the lay of the ground and saying, where are the gaps that we need to fill in terms of promises? What are the big issues? People don't have rent allowance. Let's put something there.
How do you draw the line between being populist and actually addressing real needs of people in the crafting of the manifesto so far?
Well, I think, one is the issue of there has to be certain good faith about it. Are you being sincere in this promise? Or you're just throwing it out there, either to preclude your opponent from being the first mover and getting the first mover advantage by being the one to promise it first, Or is it a real need that you are solving in a sustainable fashion? A number of the things that, when you look through the manifesto, some of the issues that we've identified, that were identified by experts, by the secondary literature and other things, are things that are structural, difficult structural problems that are there every election cycle. They outlive, they outsurvive campaign promises. You go back and you come and meet them again. So the parties certainly have a political interest in trying to solve that which they can solve to political advantage. So if there's an alignment between the proposal we're making and our political interest of winning votes, we'll make it. But it may not be solving the structural problem that ails that sector or the economy generally. So for example, on corruption, you take corruption. What are the parties proposing? When you look in corruption, you see corruption is the one area where the parties feel uncomfortable. Because that one is not a promise that you are making to give us something. It is almost like a check you're putting on yourself. This is where you are the one, you are looking yourself in the mirror and saying, okay, I know you are suspecting that I will chop your money. This is what I'm going to do
to stop myself from chopping your money.
And you see what everything they put there is about. Oh, we will resource. It's almost like we will outsource the corruption problem to special prosecutor, to Yoko, to Shraj. We will give them money. We'll just throw money at it, and they leave it at that. And some of the critical things that we've picked up are people are deeply concerned about monetization of our politics. It's been called moneycracy. I mean, there is nothing in there in the document that tells us that the parties see that as a concern, or that aspect of the corruption problem is something that they intend to do anything about. So you see nothing about campaign finance.
I think the NDC make a little attempt at it. It's just the how.
Yes,
it's like, how are you going to?
So they throw a number of things. We will do this. We will do conflict of interest law. The question is, you can actually do something called conflict of interest law. That doesn't solve conflict of interest. Right? So you can pass a disability act that says, it's called Disability Act, but that actually punishes the disabled. Because you would say, you may not beg in the streets, and if we catch you begging in the street, we'll jail you 4 years. Is it a disability-friendly act? So merely saying you will pass a conflict of interest law, tell us specifically what you will do. So, for example, if there is a bad practice we all know is a conduit for corruption. This practice of ratification that has become very common in procurement. You do something, at the time you did it, it was without warrant, it was without legal authority. And when you are found out and you are going to be surcharged or it's going to be disallowed, then you go back to your entity board and say, oh, we got it ratified. If a party says, we will plug the loopholes in procurement, for example, it means nothing to me. If they said, we will end the practice of ratification. If the thing had no authority at the time you did it, no board can ratify it after the fact. Those specific things, right? You don't see them make those promises. They are all making, when it comes to these things, they don't make things you can hold them to. They make very general commitments. We will resource this more. We will encourage, we will strengthen this institution, but they are never specific on those things where we can actually tie an obligation to them. So I think these are the kinds of things that we should begin to ask them, And for us at CDD, for example, I mean, the area of governance, as Kojo said, is one of our main areas of worry because it's a cross-cutting issue. You take corruption. There is no Ministry of Anti-Corruption, right? So there is no minister whose job it is to basically fight corruption as such. Corruption is something that you find wherever there is something sweet, right? Wherever there's an opportunity, a contract, a procurement. So it's in every sector. If in every sector where you have to allocate a public resource, a limited public resource, there's a corruption opportunity. It would be interesting, it would be really great if you could find a manifesto that says, in agriculture, this is how we are going to deal with corruption. in forestry, this is how we are going to deal with corruption. Not just throw corruption into something like governance and drop it off there like some 3-4 lines, but say in education, which is a huge budget, well, a chunk of our budget in education, how are you going to deal with corruption in education, in health? So if the mainstream say corruption in all the sectors and give us an idea, sector by sector, how you are going to deal with money that is lost through waste and corruption, that would be, for example, a very progressive step.
Yeah.
You see, so these are things that we don't find in the current manifesto, but we're all saying, we're all starting to do this. But the next time around, I think we expect to see, when I open the manifesto, I expect to see issues of corruption engaged in all the sectors.
Yeah.
Because every sector is ripe for that kind of activity.
And Prof, on that note, I want to quickly take a quick break. When I return, I'll end with Doc and back to you, Kwesi, on what, based on the project that we've seen and what we're observing, what do we want to see going forward? And again, building this democracy in terms of the qualitative nature of our manifestos and the way it responds to your real needs. So what the CDD's own vision of the future when it comes to the manifesto? Stay with us. And thank you for staying with us. This is still the Manifesto Tracker, and I've been talking to Kojo Asante, Dr. Kojo Asante, CDD, Head of Advocacy here at CDD, also the Head of the CDD, Professor Kwesi Prempeh. Kojo, so we've learned a lot. For me, this year has been a learning process for me. This is the first time I've actually had time to look at the manifestos. We've talked a lot about where the deficiencies are. How do we address the deficiency for the next 4 years, for example, so that by the time we arrive there, a lot may have changed? And how do we carry the citizens, the electorate along? Because this is really about them.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really we need to focus on is we have to solve our problems. And our problems are long-term, they're structural. So it is very important that the manifesto speak to the outcomes. It would be easier for the citizens to know that, okay, I've had access to potable water. This is how much, there are 20 people here, 12 have access to water. By the time you are done with your government, 20 people will have access to water. I think just intuitively, it's easier to measure, that I can look and say, oh, the traffic situation in this area has reduced because you promised that you reduce the traffic, whatever. Those kinds of metrics are missing in the way our manifestos are presented. So all you will hear is, we have spent 100 billion on whatever since we have been here. To what effect? How has that transformed education? How has that transformed transportation? Has that addressed the housing problem? So we end up spending money, and yet we cannot really pinpoint what kind of development outcomes that we have achieved. So I think that for me is important. One of the next phase, and actually in the coming weeks, we're going to be able to engage citizens again on the assessment, because we did an assessment of the party's manifesto, and we think, for the record, we need that kind of interrogation as a reference point going forward. So we would put out that information as well, because we expect that cycle to come back. And we are interested in also how some of the winning manifesto is implemented, after the elections. For the citizens, we just have to keep engaging, and engage in a way that they begin to understand the connection between what happens through the election process, the campaigning process, and how the parties govern when they are in power. Because they have to be interested in the party solving their problem. So it may sound great, but if they don't understand that by asking for 20 things, there's going to be trade-offs in, maybe 18 of them, and you can only do 2. If they don't get that, then they will be disappointed, at the end of the 4 years, and maybe all the 20 never get done. So those kinds of connections, I think, are important, and it can only happen if we keep engaging this way and throwing a spotlight on the manifesto.
Prof, what's your own expectation?
Well, I think that this has been a useful process. I agree with Kojo that we should get the parties to focus on the outcomes.
Because it's so input driven now. I mean, it's all
yes, absolutely. So they'll tell you we will put this amount of money in this area. You can put 10 billion in something, and another person can put 5 billion and actually achieve a better outcome. So the money itself, the investment, the input is not the measure of the success of the project. So I think it's important that we move the parties beyond the inputs and say the investment you are making in health, in maternal health, by how much is it going to reduce maternal mortality? The investment you are making in education, by how much is it going to improve literacy or numeracy at P4 or P6? So that we can measure, because I think it was actually Peter Drucker who said, what you cannot measure, you cannot manage, you cannot solve. We need things we can measure. You see, because telling me that at the end of the year, I put in more money than you, a lot of the money that is invested recycles back as procurement contracts, right? But is that what we're looking for? The problem is not procurement contracts. There is a problem of literacy and numeracy in education at all levels. Learning outcomes are bad. They don't match the investment we are making in education. That is true of Ghana. We spend a lot on education. Our learning outcomes do not reflect it. How much is what you are going to do in education going to change learning outcomes? Look at, say, the built environment. We are talking about structure. Do things solve problems? There's a tendency now, because of the small margins by which one wins or loses the election, that parties are now playing to specific constituencies with specific input promises. We're going to give you this money. We're going to do that for you, right? Because if you can get the teachers to give you their vote, the teacher allowance people or Okada people, that's what you need. Then the collective problem does not get solved. The built environment, look around us. When it rains, as it's been raining lately, just look at the mess in Accra. Whose manifesto is speaking to the mess that we have in terms of just random building all over the place? Who is going to enforce building codes? Who is going to do something about the built environment, getting municipal authorities and others to do the work? And it's not just about, when the flooding happens, then you step in and cure it. There's a problem with the built environment. Slums and other informal settlements are mushrooming all over the place. Spentex, motorway, it's happening in plain view. That's the manifesto talk about it. No, nobody wants. Yeah. And it's a painless, so this idea that, you can just develop painlessly, that development comes at no cost, is painless to the citizen, that the citizen doesn't have to do anything, just enjoy the freebie. We won't impose any pain on you at all. These are painless manifestos. They almost demand nothing of us. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Yeah.
And that cannot be the way we do this, So there has to be something that makes this a real contract. It's a give and take. That you will do this, I will do this for you, but you will do this too. This is how much we need to raise in taxes. And this is our benchmark for the 4-year period. That every year we will raise taxes to this limit. And that is what we are going to fund. So if you don't meet your target, you tell them, but you see, you didn't pay the taxes that you were supposed to pay. Yeah. So that there is
And you expect the citizen to punish them for that?
Well,
in the next election?
If it's in the manifesto already, that we projected that we will raise taxes of this amount. Of course, you have to be able to show that your level of effort as a government also counts. Yeah. So how much did you put in to raise that money? Yeah. But we have to get to a point where we know that we cannot borrow our way out of our plight. Yeah. So there has to be responsibility on citizens as well. And the manifestos so far appear totally painless, just totally painless. Yeah. I think it's a bit disingenuous in that regard.
Yeah. That is Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh. Earlier had Dr. Kojo Asante. And you know what they say, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. That's it for Manifesto Tracker tonight. Enjoy the rest of your evening.